Hey there, IGCSE history students, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really dark but absolutely essential topic for your exams: how the Nazi obsession with building an quote-unquote ideal society directly led to the systematic persecution of millions of people. We aren't just going to be memorizing dates here, we're going to dig into the actual, terrifying logic behind a state that literally weaponized its own societal ideals against its own citizens. So let's dive right in.
To kick things off, let's frame our entire analysis around one absolutely crucial question. How exactly did the pursuit of a so-called perfect society lead to the persecution of millions? Honestly, this is the core paradox you really need to wrap your head around. Because the atrocities we're about to cover, they didn't just happen randomly out of nowhere. They were the direct, highly calculated result of trying to engineer a very specific, exclusionary type of society.
Okay, here's our study map for this explainer to help you organize your notes. We'll start with the Volksgemeinschaft ideal, then break down the specific groups targeted: disabled people, asocials and homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Roma and Sinti. After that, we'll cover the camp badge system, and finally, wrap it all up with your key exam takeaways.
Right, let's jump into Section 1, the Volksgemeinschaft idea.
If there's one vital term you need to anchor your exam answers, it's this one, Volksgemeinschaft. It translates to the people's community. Sounds kind of nice on the surface, right? But notice the heavy emphasis on exclusion here. For the Nazis, this was never just about bringing racially pure Germans together. It was actively about hunting down anyone deemed different, weak, or quote-unquote undesirable, and completely cutting them out of society. And the targets were vast. We're talking about Jews, Roma and Sinti people, disabled individuals, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and anyone they slapped the label of asocial onto.
Moving on to Section 2, disabled people and Action T4.
So how did they justify all this? Well, they relied heavily on a pseudoscience called eugenics. Basically, eugenics is the deeply flawed belief that you can somehow improve the human race through selective breeding. And the Nazis took this to a truly terrifying extreme. Back in 1933, they passed a sweeping law mandating compulsory sterilization for conditions like schizophrenia, blindness, deafness, and even alcoholism. For your notes, it's super important to understand how bureaucratic this was. Decisions were made by these hereditary health courts, and incredibly, many of these life-shattering hearings lasted literally 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes to change someone's life forever.
Before we go any further, I want you to just pause and let this number sink in. 400,000. Approximately 400,000 individuals were forcibly sterilized under Nazi rule. The state used sheer physical force to guarantee that people they considered undesirable simply couldn't have children. Its state-sponsored biological control on an unimaginably massive scale.
And chillingly, that state-sponsored biological control quickly escalated from sterilization to systematic murder. This was known as Action T4. In 1939, Hitler secretly greenlit a euthanasia program. Now, euthanasia typically implies ending a life to stop unbearable suffering, right? But here, it was nothing more than a disguise for mass murder. Named after its Berlin headquarters, the program targeted mentally ill adults and severely disabled individuals. Victims were starved, given lethal injections, or gassed. Now, there was pushback. Church leaders like Bishop von Galen protested so loudly and publicly that Hitler actually had to officially halt the program in 1941. Though tragically, the killings discontinued in secret.
As part of this nightmare, over 5,000 disabled children were murdered in special centers. The crucial takeaway here for your historical understanding is that Action T4 was not just some isolated horror. The twisted bureaucracy, the gas chambers, the methods of killing developed here, all of it directly paved the way for the Holocaust. It was quite literally the testing ground for mass extermination.
Let's look at Section 3, asocials and homosexuals.
You can really clearly see the escalating persecution of groups the Nazis labeled asocials. And who exactly were they? We're talking beggars, the homeless, criminals, sex workers, and juvenile delinquents. Look at how chilling this progression is. In 1933, you get mass arrests. By 1936, the state wants to sweep this reality under the rug, so police literally clear beggars off the streets just to make Germany look good for international visitors during the Berlin Olympics. Then, by 1938, we go from street sweeping to massive organized roundups where these people were sent straight to concentration camps like Buchenwald.
Alongside those asocials, homosexuals faced absolutely brutal persecution. Now, it's a key historical distinction for your exams to note that the Nazis aggressively targeted gay men in particular. Why? Because they viewed male homosexuality as degenerate, since it wouldn't produce children to fuel their Aryan race. The laws were expanded in 1935, leading to around 100,000 arrests. Men were thrown into camps, subjected to horrific conditions, and some were even forced into quote-unquote voluntary castration. Lesbians, on the other hand, were generally treated differently. The Nazis categorized them mostly as asocials rather than a direct racial threat to their reproduction goals.
All right, moving into Section 4, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Roma.
The story of Jehovah's Witnesses under the Nazi regime is genuinely one of incredible, unwavering resistance. Because of their strict religious beliefs, they flat out refused to swear loyalty to Hitler. They totally rejected compulsory military service, and they wouldn't even perform the Nazi salute. Obviously, a totalitarian state isn't going to tolerate that kind of defiance. But despite facing severe, life-threatening consequences, resulting in about 10,000 of them being imprisoned in concentration camps by 1945, they really stood out for their steadfast refusal to conform.
Now, check out this chronological escalation against the Roma and Sinti people, who the Nazis violently targeted for perceived racial inferiority. Just like we saw earlier, it's a terrifying, step-by-step radicalization. In 1935, the infamous Nuremberg Laws, which were initially aimed at Jews, were applied to the Roma and Sinti. By 1936, you get this very detailed, cold bureaucratic classification happening. In 1938, Heinrich Himmler issues a horrific decree framing their very existence as a plague. And then by 1939, all that paperwork officially turned into systematic mass murder with deportations straight to camps in Poland.
Which brings us to Section 5, Concentration Camp Badges.
I highly recommend grabbing a screenshot of this table for your study notes. Memorizing these colored triangles is a real game changer for understanding how rigidly the Nazis categorized their victims inside the camps. Political prisoners got a red triangle. Criminals were marked with green. Homosexual men were forced to wear a pink triangle. Jehovah's Witnesses wore purple. And asocials were tagged with black. And of course, Jewish prisoners, who bore the absolute ultimate brunt of Nazi racial hatred, were forced to wear the yellow Star of David. It was a visual system designed entirely to strip away human identity and replace it with a state-assigned colored label.
Finally, let's land the plane with Section 6, Key Exam Takeaways.
Okay, so if your exam asks you to explain the underlying motivations for Nazi persecution, you're going to want to lean heavily on these 4 foundational points. Number 1, their fundamental pseudoscientific belief in racial superiority. Number 2, that unrelenting desire for a pure Aryan society, the Volksgemeinschaft we talked about at the very beginning. Number 3, this deeply paranoid fear that minorities were somehow weakening Germany from the inside. And number 4, the core totalitarian belief that the state mattered infinitely more than any individual human rights.
I want to leave you with a solemn thought to chew on as you review these notes. It reflects the real, devastating human reality behind the history we've been breaking down today. If achieving a quote-unquote perfect society requires the absolute destruction of individual rights and the sacrifice of millions of human lives, what is the true cost of that utopia? Because understanding this history isn't just about passing your IGCSEs, it's really about recognizing the terrifying dangers of exclusionary ideologies. Keep studying hard, keep asking those difficult questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.